Joel.
Yanziza.
You always do your introductions in Uganda.
Musibia mutia banyabo neva sebo. Kopango, Akironyo.
Do you add on language every other time?
Well, it just depends on the audience, but I mean, I could speak Lugbara, Mingonia, Buenos días. Yo puedo hablar en español bastante bien. Estudié la lengua en mi escuela secundaria pública. Nihongo ga dekimasu ka? I can speak Japanese. Yeah. Irashaimase?
Can you speak Russian?
No. Not very. I only know a few words.
What do people in Ukraine?
Well, half of Ukraine speaks Russian. The western half speaks Russian. The part that had already seceded and that Putin recognized, Lugansk, Donetsk.
How does Ukraine come about? Let's give me some history.
Okay, so Ukraine's got this really interesting history. I think it relates to how the glaciers melted. And so their soil has got the most black soil, fertile soil in all of Europe. And Ukraine is very large. It's as large as France, right? So it's not some small thing. And it's on the ocean or water. It's on the Black Sea, which can get to the Mediterranean Sea and then can get to the Atlantic. So from Russia's perspective, this is a way to get access to warm water, because in the winter, their ports freeze, right? In the north, it's so cold, it freezes over. And so Russia has always wanted to be able to have warm water ports. That's why they are involved in Syria and have a naval port there. And Crimea is important for Russian warm water access, whether for trade or military. So Russia and Ukraine, anyway, so this geography is just so valuable. And it's not just value strategically to a nation, but when you have really good farmland and good rainfall, well, you know, that's Uganda's situation too. People end up being more independent minded and it's harder to control them. So they tend to be more democratic.
People have very good land.
And they're pretty independent minded compared to a lot of other African countries as families, as individuals, right? I mean, Ugandans are very, confident, self-confident compared to other places.
Russians like this?
Russians come from a more forbidding environment, right? That's the strength of their culture. They tamed really rough wilderness. It was, very cold. And the rivers don't run in the right direction to help them. So like Ukraine, it's just perfect. You can ride a river halfway through Ukraine. All of the rivers in Russia run in the opposite direction. So you can't you can't use your rivers to help you trade. America's got that going for it. So does Canada. The rivers are just perfect for facilitating trade. Same with, Holland and Germany. So Russia's got rough geography and they had to be tough people to make it work. Now my family, I have family background in many countries. I'm Jewish, so we've been chased around for centuries, and I've had family in Ukraine, in Russia, in Belarus, Poland, Morocco, etc., etc. But I mean, and they've been successful and they've been killed or harassed. I'm not a fan or enemy of anyone on this front. For me, I'm here in Uganda.
So what's the magnitude of between Russia and Ukraine, and why do you think it has come about now?
Well, it keeps on happening, right? This has got a eerie historical rhythm to it. During 1932, 1933, 10 million Ukrainians starved to death because of grain policies by Stalin. And so that was how many years? That's 90 years ago, right? So, and then before that was the Crimean War, right? Where Russia fought for control over Crimea with Turkey. And you can keep on going back about 80, 90 years over and over and over again. I was looking through the history books just the other day. It looks like for at least 500 years, these guys clash.
So this whole confusion I'm hearing about.
It's just different, slightly different patterns, because Ukraine's borders have, been changing over time. What's considered part of Ukraine versus part of Poland or Romania or Russia or Moldova or Belarus. So it's its borders shift over time, but it's generally been Russian Orthodox affiliated, Orthodox Christian affiliated. It has its own branch of the Orthodox Christian Church there. So underneath this, though, is the rivalry really between Russia and Germany and Russia and Turkey.
Also.
Well, those are the powerful places, right? Ukraine's just kind of caught in the middle, right? There's that whole buffer zone of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia. Well, Turkey and Germany have been independently powerful in history, right? Turkey was the seat of the Ottoman Empire for, when did they start? That was 1453 is when they captured Constantinople, but they had started even earlier than that. I think like 1037 was their big famous victory battle of Manzikert. So, and they didn't fall until 1917. So they were around for 1,000 years. And you could argue, even before the Ottoman Empire, that same location was where the Byzantine Empire was. And the Byzantium was the eastern part of the Roman Empire. So you could argue that's been like the center of empire for like 2,000 or 3,000 years. And then Germany has always been powerful but very divided. And they didn't unite until the 1800s and 1860s, right? And but they're very powerful. They're
the people that stay.
The German people are very talented and industrious and frugal and inventive, and so their industry, and they have had good coal resources. Oh, Germany had many different warring tribes, right?
Like we have
Yeah,
here.
yeah, for centuries. They called it the Holy Roman Empire, but it was a bunch of warring princely, tribes or kingdoms, right? And the rest of Europe used to see them as being very primitive, and but they eventually became very powerful. And so, Germany and Russia, are frenemies. German capital, German industry truly relies upon Russian raw materials and Russian labor. Russia doesn't want to be subordinated as a raw material, cheap labor supplier to German industry and banking. So they've been fighting about this, as I said, periodically, about every 80 years. World War II was mainly Germany versus Russia, right? And the opening of World War II was these two countries at first allied, right? And then you could say the Nord Stream pipeline was an example of that. And then they broke apart and then ended up going to war, Hitler versus Stalin. So
Do you think we're going to have a World War III?
I think that's just cement. I mean, what do we call it? I don't know what to call it. I mean, we're in for a rough ride. We already have been with the COVID lockdowns. So this is going to get rough, I think, here. And that's what I worry about. I mean, everybody wants to know, who do you support? And I'm like, I'm living here in Africa, and we don't have, and a lot of these countries are not as blessed as Uganda with food security. Like Kenya gets a third of all their grain from those countries. Egypt gets 70% of all of its grain from Ukraine and Russia. And then the World Food Program, right? The one that's supposed to bail everybody out when they're starving to death. They get 70% of their grain from Russia and Ukraine. So we're going to have a grain crisis if this war lasts very long at all. So I hope it gets, whatever happens, I don't have any influence over it anyway, so my opinion doesn't matter. And everybody wanting to argue about who's on the right and wrong, to me it doesn't matter. I just see that a bunch of people around the world are going to starve to death. So whatever's going to get done, please do it quickly and get the crops planted before in spring, so that there's enough food for the world.
Wait, how come this World Food Program gets food from Russia?
They get wheat in particular, but a lot of crops. Just the sheer size, right? Russia's huge. Ukraine is huge compared to Uganda. We're a small country, right? So Uganda's chapatis come from wheat from Ukraine. They come from, well, some of it comes from Argentina, but most of it comes from Ukraine and Russia.
So if this continues, Rolex guys are going to be out of business.
Maybe they'll have to switch to thinner, like Mexican tortillas. They're thinner. Maybe they could do that, or maybe they switch to maize tortillas. Also maybe they're going to have to learn from the Mexicans.